5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Good afternoon. Welcome to America's New Clothes with your host. My name is Derek. Please follow us on Facebook and YouTube at America's New Clothes, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at America's New C. Also, please like this video as it helps us to get around the algorithms for the censorship, as we will be discussing things today that Twitter, Google, and Facebook hate and censor from their platforms, which is election fraud. Bear with me today. I'm experimenting with OBS for the first time on a live recording today. So if you can be patient, I may be a little disjointed, but I do want to bring to you the research and data that I have compiled all to the screen here, so you can also view it and maybe share with others that if you're in discussions with them on this same topic, that they can also see it. Okay, so looking at these pre-election polls, they were woefully wrong. This is just how far off they were. I want to give credit. A lot of these slides you're going to see today are from the Steve Deace show. You can follow him on Twitter and then on the Blaze TV. I'll have his Twitter handle here on a couple of these slides, but he put together just how far off the final national polls were. The CNN, NPR, and USC were the most far off at 9 points. Quinnipiac, which I actually use quite a bit and have in the past, they were off by 8 points. Wall Street Journal, 7 points. YouGov, which a lot of people on the left always try to go to, 7. New York Times, 6. Fox News, 5. The most reliable were Investor Business Daily and The Hill, which were at 0.9. Rasmussen, who was the most accurate in 2016 on the national level, was at 2.1. So they were off 2 points on this election. Anyway, here you see, again, just in the battleground states, they can show you here Arizona, Florida, Georgia, so forth and so on, where the pre-election polls were, and then where the final tallies were. But Wisconsin, I think, are at like some of these polls were so far off that it was just ridiculous. People's Pundit, actually, I think yesterday put out a poll or put out an update as to where the Wisconsin polls were and just how far off they were. But anyway, reason why, and a lot of times you have these early polls, is to suppress the vote. And the Democrats always show, or the media always says, that it's Republicans suppressing the vote by intimidating you at the polls, or making it so hard to get a voter registration and to register to vote, which is just you go into any minority neighborhood, and someone did this in 2016, I believe, or maybe it was 2012, and said, hey, to white people, hey, what do you think about voter ID? And almost every single one of them had said, oh, that's racist, and it makes it more difficult for people to go to get an ID. That same person then interviewed a bunch of African Americans, and it was, well, yeah, sure, my DMV's a block away. I can go over there. They were saying that it was stupid to think that they are not capable of getting a voter ID. So the left just wants to use that because they have to keep using racism. It's all they have. Abraham Ayash, at the Detroit City Council, was that he used the word caucasity, right, which is just a racist term. He said, so while you may, this is quote unquote, so while you may show us your caucasity, today, in refusing to certify the election and making note that you're okay with certifying all of Wayne County except Detroit, know that we see what's happening. Know that there is nothing other than Jim Crowing that is going on right now, and recognize the facts. He says, and what that tells us is you, Miss Monica Palmer from Grosse Pointe Woods, which has a history of racism, deciding to enable and continue to perpetuate the racist history. And I want you to think about what that means to your kids who probably go to Grosse Pointe North, and when they see all of their black classmates. I mean, again, that's all these people have is racism, unfortunately, to hammer home their argument. But if we go state by state, and you can see we're going to go into the suppression of the vote by the left, and what that ends up doing, unfortunately, is it causes them to, on this, their suppression is the way that they can say, for Wisconsin, for example, when one of the last polls that came out was Biden plus 17, is that if you're in the last week or 2 weeks of a campaign, and you're trying to raise money, if you're someone who's a middle class person and you've got $10 that you wanted to donate to the campaign, but you see that your guy's down 17 points, are you going to donate that money? No. So it's suppressing the vote in that it's suppressing money coming into the campaign, And in my view, when you look at the totality of all of these polls that were so far off, that's what they were trying to do. They try to say, well, we don't know, we're still learning how to poll in social media day where everybody's got a cell phone. That's bogus. That's just a way for them to try to carry favor for their next election for 2022 and why they should still be considered polling. Polling's done. You shouldn't pay attention to any polls anymore. They're just ridiculous. I mean, again, even the good ones, for the most part, were off. Now we go through this state-by-state review, and you can see here that you have the takeaways here was that Trump was winning or won 5 states where he was behind in 2016. You'll see this from the slides I'm going to putting up here in a second. This year, the GOP led in the early voting or return ballots by just inside of a point in 4 of those, but somehow lost. So they were either led or were just down by about a point in 4, being Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, but somehow they lost those. They closed much larger gaps in 2016 in those states, except for Nevada. Clinton won Nevada, I think, 2.4. Trump led, in Wisconsin all night by 4 to 5 points, despite the second largest county, which is Dane, which is where University of Wisconsin is, having all of their mail-in ballots were in the shuffle. So all of those vote dumps came in mixed up. So it would be 51-49 or 55-45, so forth and so on. But Milwaukee, it all came in after the polls closed, after midnight, and those were the huge drops that all of a sudden went for Biden. And I think that's what Trump and them are going to be challenging. The early electorate, mail-in and in-person ballot, in-person voting was overwhelming this year. Some of them, I think, state of Texas was over 106% of what the 2016 total vote was. So you knew there was going to be a big get out the vote in Texas. And then the GOP usually obviously votes on election day, so that gap should be easier to overcome. These gaps that they were behind in by just over a point, or just under a point rather, you should be able to easily overcome those, but they didn't. And so that begs the question as to why. Especially if, again, most of the early votes go to Democrats, or that's the theory, right? Their theory, the left's theory is, well, Trump told all of his followers not to mail in ballots because you can't trust the United States postal system. They're going to get lost and burned, which is what we saw, obviously, as well. Myriad of examples of that. But their theory is that the Democrats should have been leading early on in all of the early voting and in mail-in ballots, and so therefore the Republicans would show up on election day and vote, and the Democrats would not. Here, the early polling was wrong across the board and in the battleground states. And what we don't see is a same symmetrical pattern of the urban population votes across the U.S. as we did in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit. So we have to ask why. Why is it just that these 4 cities somehow overwhelmingly dropped massive vote counts, all for one client or very heavily weighted for one client or one candidate? But you didn't see the same in Dallas. You didn't see the same in St. Louis. You didn't see the same in Miami. So it just begs the question, something there doesn't make sense. So why were the very large vote dumps only in those 4 cities and the D.C. suburbs, being in Virginia, and not everywhere? Where there was large mail-in ballots returns sent in. And again, remember, in absentee ballots, and even in these states where you had to have an excuse, we created this year a COVID-19 excuse. So if you didn't want to go to the polls because of COVID-19, then you could request a ballot, but you had to send in the registration and how, so they could keep track of it. So they would know, all right, 1,000 people requested ballots in this county, 800 went out, so they would expect 800 to come back. That's not what happened, which is very, very peculiar and odd. So here in North Carolina, we'll look at the 2016. So what this is going to show here is that in 2016, Democrats were leading in early voting, and I don't know if they didn't do mail-in ballots, but they always do absentee. So they were leading by 10 points in North Carolina in 2016. The Democrats were. In this year, Democrats were leading by 1, and the turnout had already been 90% of the electorate. So Trump won by 3.6 points in 2016, despite GOP being down 10 points in 2016 going into Election Day. So all these slides are going to be set up the same way, so just follow along with that. Again, want to be courtesy of the Steve Deace Show. It's at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, and then he's at Blaze TV as well. Here in Iowa, again, this was a state where supposedly Ernst was down 7. I think they had Trump down, or Biden plus 7 in one poll at the end. The Des Moines Register, who uses a polling group, they came in that it was Trump plus 7, I think 3 days or so before Election Day. They typically have been right. And then looking at my notes here, we did have Trump winning Iowa by 8.3, so they were about right. Turnout was at 58% of the 2016 electorate, in which Trump won by 9.4, but he overcame a 3.3 point deficit going into Election Day. Texas, the same. They had a 9.6 GOP, was plus 9.6 in 2016. They ended up winning that by 9. The turnout this year was just huge. They had already had almost 4 million people, which is 106% of the total turnout in 2016 for early voting. And so they had a 10-point gap going into this year. He ended up winning Texas by about 5.7. And if you go and look at the voting data, the county by county data, you'll see that the overwhelming uptick in blue vote, Democrat vote, were in Texas, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. Otherwise, Trump pretty much outperformed in every other county that he outperformed or that he performed in 2016. Another thing you'll see here too that it should be brought to light is that across the country, Biden underperformed in every major metropolitan area for the most part, other than Milwaukee, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Detroit. So again, very odd. Those are the cities and states that they knew they needed to try to get, that Texas, Florida, Ohio were completely out of reach. And then they went after Arizona and Nevada as well. Ohio, same thing. Democrats were up by 8 points roughly in 2016. Trump won by 8. With 57% of the electorate coming out. Ohio this year, GOP was up 6.4, which is one reason why you did not see Biden battling in Ohio and really even in Florida at the end. And they canceled all their stuff in Texas about a week prior to the election. They had known that those 3 states were gone. What you also saw, this is where it starts to tell you that something was going on nefarious late at night. Biden's campaign manager on the day of election, so around 10 o'clock in the morning, I think, or 10:30, she was already coming out and saying, hey guys, we can actually lose Florida, Ohio, and Texas and still win. She then said we can still lose Pennsylvania and win, meaning that they thought they could hold on to Michigan, Wisconsin, get Nevada and Arizona, and Georgia, I think, and they could hold on and get a 270 for the electorate vote. They were in full panic mode. Once you go in and look at this in more detail, you can understand why. Here in Florida, again, same thing. Democrats are up 5.4. Trump won that state by 1.2. That already so far this year in early in-person voting and mail-in balloting, we are already at 86% of the total electorate. Trump ended up winning Florida by 3.3 so far this year with the vote count. They went into this year up just under a point. So you can see that Florida had flipped for Trump. And as Steve Deace had said, and again, we're using Target Smart data, so I don't know if you can see the information, but down here in the right corner, this is Target Smart data, and that's a Democrat polling and data science firm. So what Steve Deace was doing in these slides was to show if I start from my worst case scenario using a Democrat strategist platform, then I can set up a strategy, for example, of knowing how to advise a client or advise my candidate as to where we should target and how we should go about the ground game. Moving on here to Michigan, you see Democrats had a 2.2 advantage in 2016. Trump won that by 0.3. This year they went in with a lead of 3.6, so they did increase their early voting lead, but 60% of the electorate had come out. So again, if you're assuming 40% of the electorate remained to go vote from 2016, and most of those are going to be Republican, then you can make up that gap there. Not easily, but it may be a challenge, but they could make it up. Pennsylvania, totally different story. And this is because they just flooded the state with registration and mail-in ballots. And you were supposed to have to register and send in the information. We're finding out now they kind of just sent them out to whoever on certain counties, just sent them out to their voters. And so in 2016, the GOP had an 8-point lead. Trump won that state by 0.7. This year, Democrats had a 32-point lead. So definitely harder to overcome. But the turnout, again, was 2.1 million, almost 2,150,000, which is more than 10 times the early voters they had in 2016, and about 40% of the electorate. Again, if they're up by 32.3, and most Democrats had voted, again, I keep hammering this, is the leftist logic, that all of our voters turned out in early voting or in mail-in voting, then if you have 60% of the electorate left, the overwhelming preponderance of that would then be Republican. So that gap could be closed, especially if you had an 8-point victory here. And keep in mind that up in Erie, and then even in the outward suburbs of Philadelphia, Trump carried those in 2016. And from all indications of what people on the ground in Pennsylvania were saying, he was going to do that again, which meant that Biden had to really outperform in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. Some shenanigans went on in both. You can look at the House race that Parnell was in here in Allegheny and see some stuff going on there. I think there's a potential that he may challenge that race, but nothing else has been said. Wisconsin, this is probably going to go to a runoff. I think Trump was just sending in about $3 million today to get that runoff ready. So here, Democrats were +9 in 2016. Trump won by 0.7. This year going in, they were at 1.2. And 61% of the electorate had turned out. Again, 39% of the electorate remained, according to what the 2016 was. If it was a turnout the vote, the Trump campaign across the board, you can ask anybody in politics, the Biden camp had a horrible ground game this year. They were even saying it was worse than Hillary's, and Hillary's was terrible. Hillary just thought she'd win because she's Hillary Clinton. Biden's campaign, because of COVID-19, couldn't get canvassers. They couldn't get people to go knock on doors. So they didn't have a get out the vote until I don't think they started even putting in full campaign stops or offices in some of these states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, I think Texas and Arizona, until September. So horrible ground game, whereas the Trump campaign, they claim, in the last 2 months alone, they had reached 150 million people. So, and knocking on doors. So anyway, 1.2, easy gap to make up. Trump was kicking butt in this state going into when everyone decided to shut down and pull the plug for the night. So here, again, you can look at some of the close polls going in, or the close of polls going into midnight. Now, I had different numbers than this when I left my desk at 3:30 in the morning on the 4th. But according to this still image, Trump was up 15 points in Pennsylvania with 64% in. In Michigan, he was up by 306,000 with about 59% in. In Georgia, he was up by, 210,000 with 83% in. In North Carolina, which he has ended up winning, he was up by about 1.5 points, and that was with 94% in. And then Wisconsin, with 82% in, he was up by 128,000. So again, these show you that just how big his lead was at the end of the night, and just how much Biden had to overcome. Here are I want to look at some of these counties, and you can see here how much more they turned out the vote. And again, this has everything to do with the turnout the vote, or the mail-in vote, and the shenanigans that went on. In Allegheny, an 8% increase. In Bucks County, which actually was Trump won in 2016, he ended up losing barely into this year, but an 11% increase, 15% increase, 11, 11, 17, 15, 19, so forth and so on. But what's interesting is that if you then look at, say, Cuyahoga County, which is a very strong Democrat stronghold, he actually underperformed. 2.2% was his decrease. So he lost he lost 2.2% of the 2016 vote that Hillary carried in Delaware. He was down 2.8 in Hamilton, Ohio, which is again another strong blue stronghold. He was down 0.1. Montgomery, Ohio, 0.5. So again, what you will see here, and then you get into Pennsylvania, you can see Philadelphia underperformed. Right, overall in Philadelphia County. Now in the city, he seemed to somehow do amazingly better, but in the county, he was underperformed. You see in Iowa, he even outdid Hillary here, and then in Marion, Indiana, another stronghold, about 4%. So he was underperforming in so many of these places. But then you look at Oakland, Michigan, 17, Montgomery, Pennsylvania, 16.5%, Kent, Michigan, 18. These defy logic. If you're having a big, strong turnout to vote, usually Ohio, the Rust Belt will all be the same. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin will pretty much all see roughly the same increases. They didn't this time, which is telling you something was going on here that just doesn't make sense and doesn't add up. Here also on the absentee ballots, you get into, this was the final, this is as of New York Times as of 11/5. Not all counties had reported, but the absentee ballot vote margin defies logic here. So the entire state of Pennsylvania is going to end up being about 50 to 49 as it stands right now, or 49, 50 to 48.8 or something. So if the entire state is going to vote that closely and absentee ballots are coming in from around the state, what Pennsylvania and the New York Times is showing here is that all of the absentee ballots that were requested came back at plus 60 points for Biden, meaning 80-20. But the state voted basically 49-49, and to make numbers simple. This is a mathematical impossibility. You may have one county that may come back 80-20, but if you're counting statewide absentee ballots, you do not have a 60-point discrepancy when the state goes 50-50 or 49-49 rather. Michigan the same. You had a 38-point difference. Ohio a 15-point difference, yet you just saw in these blue strongholds, he didn't carry much of anything. He lost vote count in the three counties that are the big strong blue strongholds. So here, this is probably likely, right? Arizona, Georgia, Minnesota, North Carolina, single digits, where they may come in 51-45 or 54, 46 or 47, something like that. These are more normal. This right here is just alarming, and this is what's got everybody's attention, because the other thing that Richard Barris had said on Friday of last week, or the week of the election. He had said that we had been told, we being the people in the polling industry and that cover elections and do it for a living and get paid to do it for a living, they had been told by Pennsylvania election board or election office that there was 450,000 absentee ballots left outstanding. Oddly, the next morning and that was at the end of the day, Thursday. On Friday morning, he said, they ended up saying, whoops, sorry, we messed up. It's actually 750,000. You don't have a 300,000 ballot found that you didn't account for. Again, you send out absentee ballots and a vote by excuse. You have them registered, so you know how many you have outstanding. So somehow, miraculously, they found 300,000 ballots that, again, just happened to go 80% or 60 points for Joe Biden. Ridiculous. I want to give credit to on Twitter at YINONW. This guy named Yanon Weiss, I think is his name, for pulling this data together. All right, so looking at these exit polls. So anyone who looked at the exit polls, and I've gone through, and I tried to use CNN for both 2016 and 2020, maybe in some House races looking at 2018. But if you look at the exit poll data, anyone who looks at it, in all fairness, it will show a absolute landslide for Joe Biden, given the independent vote get out and his increase in flip of even pushing above and beyond what Clinton did across the board. I'll get to my conclusions on the exit polls later on, but if you look at them, Trump didn't stand a chance. So the exit polls again would show an overwhelming support for Trump, and they just don't. But here you had election day coverage of NBC, ABC, CBS, and CNN versus the AP VoteCast and the differences. 74% of whites voted, and then over on the AP election, it was only 65% Latino, 10 to 13, 27 to 22 for seniors. And then you look at how we voted. White women in college, the AP shows Biden plus 20. The NBC and the election day coverage showed Trump plus 1. Household income, all of these are AP shows Biden 4, so plus 11 here, over on the other side. Now we get into kind of let me go back. My bad. Let me pull up some of the exit poll data here. So let's look at Ohio. Trump won he grew basically in all of these states, with the exception where you see a red here. So this is Trump here, just for purposes of discussion, and Hillary and Biden will be over here on the left side. You see here in Ohio, supposedly Biden grew his vote count in every single county. Trump did as well, with the exception of one, which was Hamilton, and he grew it by about 8.25% over these counties. I just try to randomly take the biggest counties and then pick a few small ones. As you can see here, Wayne County, 15,000 votes for Hillary, and so Meeks County was only 2,200, just to show that even in the small counties, Trump was growing his vote. So again, if the Republicans fled Donald Trump, it does not show up in any of this data. And nor does it show up on the exit polls overall in total. If you go back here and look at, say, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, let me grow this here. You can see where the narrative just does not work again. But unfortunately, here in this red, this is Trump compared to Biden. Trump lost every county with the exception of 2 to Biden, yet he grew his vote count in every county in Wisconsin by an average of 14%. But somehow, miraculously, Biden, who can't get 12 people to a campaign stop, and they have to speak to cars, and even then is having trouble getting 12 cars there, somehow grew his vote count in Wisconsin by 20%. Now, if you listen to anybody on the ground in Wisconsin, radio shows there, they say this is an absolute rigged election, that so many people, like Trump was going to win this in a landslide. You were seeing that again on election night, which is why they shut everything down. Here in Pennsylvania, Trump won the same counties except for one, I think, or two, I'm sorry, that he won in 2016, or that he decreased vote in. All the green here, again, Biden won every single county, with the exception of he decreased his count here in Philadelphia. Trump grew his inner city Philadelphia county by 18%, whereas Biden lost it by 1.5%. So again, none of this makes any sense as well. If Trump is growing his count, it doesn't make any sense as to why he would lose. And then you extrapolate this data down, you'll see that Trump actually he grew by 9.7% his share of the vote versus Biden 6.6% in Pennsylvania, but somehow lost that state. Looking at Arizona, kind of the same thing. You actually had more people vote, it seems, in some of these counties in Arizona than they have registered. But again, just none of this makes sense. Trump is growing his share of every single state. He's increasing his vote by 33%. He grew his vote over 2016. Biden the same, but somehow Trump loses this county, and he increased his margin with Hispanics, I think, by 17 total points. He was at 41% this election. I think he was at 24, 25 in 2016. So again, these are the things that just don't make any sense. If you go through and look at everything on the exit poll data, at compiling all this information together and figuring out where, logically where we end up and how we've arrived here. Okay, so go back to the Dominion system. So what you're seeing here, Dominion, the light color yellow is where Hart InterCivic is used. The green is what's called election systems and software. All the orange is the Dominion voting systems. You see the entire state of Georgia, Maricopa County, oddly, Nevada, many counties in Wisconsin here, and then in Michigan, and then in certain counties in Pennsylvania, not all of them. And so this starts to call into question kind of where we were on the Dominion software stuff. But my argument, again, going back and looking at the exit polls, is that you can't have everything that the left claims hold up, right? I mean, they can't all be true, but they can't all be false. So the exit polls don't hold up under scrutiny. They show Trump winning the white vote compared to Hillary Clinton in 2016 by only 1 point margin. So he did lose white voters. But what you see is you also see that he still held on to the white vote, but he grew his margins everywhere else. And then you're looking at each state exit poll breakdown in the battleground states, it's just wrong. He did lose white men, but he increased amongst white women by, I think, 2 points overall. What you then saw is Latino women seem to break heavily. Again, Biden still won the Latino and the black vote, but from 2016 comparisons, a lot of Latino women broke heavily for Trump as well. I think he grew in Arizona by 7 points, if I'm not mistaken. So coming off of the exit poll information, we can look at here. So this was some of the shenanigans that went on. You had the Pennsylvania AG, a guy named Josh Shapiro, in the night before. He had said, if all the votes are added up in Pennsylvania, Trump is going to lose. That's why he's working overtime to subtract as many votes as possible from this process. For the record, he's 0-6 against us, meaning in court, and we've protected voting rights. So now ignore the noise, vote. GOP over here says there are some of the people, these are some of the people who voted in Pennsylvania. 840 were over 101 years old. 39 lived through the Civil War, and 45 were born in the 1800s, and they link to where you can actually go for yourself. Here you had Biden's, this is now Ron Klain, who's now been named Biden's chief of staff, and said 68% of Americans think elections are rigged. His response was, that's because they are. Again, Biden's chief of staff here. This is the guy who was the IG who went to meet with, or I'm sorry, the FBI guy, IG, who went to meet with the U.S. Postal Service whistleblower who the media now claims recanted his story. He says flat out he did not. He's been on, he actually dropped the undercover video or audio, I guess, of the federal agent who pressured Jeff Streeter. So he's using an alias here. But he basically goes way back here and talks about, don't watch Trump's town hall. He's heading out to vote, deep breaths, it's going to be a long day. Then he comes back here and starts talking about how, wow, things are looking great. This whole red mirage was a mirage. And give thanks to Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams worked with with Mark Zuckerberg to get out the vote and basically learn to harvest votes. So it's corrupt as it comes as well. And then over here on the left, you see this is a guy from Venezuela who, or I guess he says he's from Venezuela, but he tweeted, this looks like it would be a Facebook Messenger thing. He said, I am from Venezuela. We had the same situation here. They will steal as many votes as they can. We need to fight. We experienced the same with the Chavistas in Venezuela. Now we are witnessing the same fraud here in the U.S. For example, in Venezuela, in parentheses, before Chavez, the election results were always the same day. When Chavez got to power, the Chavistas changed some rules, and now the results took days. Time enough to fix as many votes as needed. Normally at the end of the night, the opposition party was winning for a lot, and suddenly in the middle of the night, thousands of votes for Chavez came in. It was a pattern. We need to fight for the truth. There was another guy I was listening to who said that in Venezuela, as they were going to, on one election night, they were going to, I think it was Maduro's election, and it looked like the other guy was in the lead. Internet went down across the entire country for 2 hours. And then voila, right, come back and Maduro's leading. So again, and guess who does the software and works the election systems for Venezuela? You guessed it, Dominion Software. Based in Toronto, a video of a guy trying to get in to see their headquarters operation in Toronto in an office building where they office with the Tides Foundation, which is George Soros. They've now taken their names off the placards. There's no indication as to what suite they're in, that type of thing. And nobody at Dominion Software would talk to the guy as he came in the door. Again, if there's nothing to hide, you did everything on the up and up. One, why don't you come out as the CEO or the chairman of the board of that company, watching your image be damaged left and right? Why aren't they out there saying, hold on, guys, we didn't cheat. We didn't write any of these algorithms. We'll open it here. Come in, check everything out, right? Feds, come on in. And why the feds aren't, locking them down and subpoenaing them, I have no idea. But, that's, again, just goes back to the whole system. What you're seeing here now is you had on 538, which is Nate Silver's group, he actually tweeted out on November 4th at 2:58 p.m. It says 2 more batches of Pennsylvania votes were reported. 23,277 votes in Philadelphia, all for Biden. About 5,300 votes in Luzerne County, which is north suburbs, nearly 4,000 of which were for Biden. So with 83% of the expected vote in, Trump's lead in Pennsylvania is now just 6 points. So you had 23,277 votes all go for Biden. Again, just mathematically impossible. Or I shouldn't say that. Theoretically, it's possible. Mathematically, it's highly improbable. What you're seeing here, now this is the Edison software data dumps I was telling you about. Okay, here you have 52.4, so the left column is for Biden, and the right column is for Trump. Now, what's odd right out of the gate is you see 52.4, 45.9. That's not how votes. I mean, again, you're coming in, you don't fractionally count them, so they should be coming in. And if you go over and break them down, these numbers end up being actually different. Once you deduct, say, this cell from this cell, you'll get a different number, and they don't total up, which was really odd that I found in going through and combing through the data myself. But you'll see here a negative 37,510 votes taken away from Biden, but 330,153 taken away from Trump. Here you saw another 80,357 taken from Biden, 308,342 taken from Trump. So what this goes to show is they were just writing an algorithm to say, all right, you're going to muck up the system so bad, and then add these numbers back down here so you can start trying to parse it out, equal it out. But they knew how many they needed, so now they start gaming the system. So even here at the end of the, I think this was on the 6th of November, or of December, of the 6th. I'm sorry, my bad. This was the blue votes is Biden, and the red is Trump. That's right, red for GOP, blue for Democrat. So I was wrong up here. You started seeing a lot of votes being deducted from Biden, but then they're added back, right? So this, if you see right here, 308, 342 comes in. Oop, mistake, deduct that, right? Then you see a 308, 502 down here, and only 77,000 for Trump, 191,000 to 67,000. But anyway, you're seeing the deducts occur, and you just can't make heads or tails of this. But you can find this data online now and download it for yourself. Go through if you know anything about how to write formulas in Excel. And even though I was in investment banking, I'm not an expert at it. Thank goodness I had a very, very smart analyst that did a lot of this work for me. Shout out to Brent. But anyway, if you go through that data yourself, you can see what all is going on there. Now, continuing on here, the next question from the liberals is, well, what happened to, if it was going to be a rigged election for Biden, why didn't they rig the House seats and the Senate seats and everything else? That's not how they do it. Your main focus is picking up the presidency. The Democrats believed that they were going to pick up House seats to begin with, which didn't bear out. In the Senate, the gaps between here in Georgia, for example, you normally will see. So right now, Trump and David Perdue are almost on top of each other. They're about 6,000 or 7,000 votes separate them. But in the Senate race here with Ossoff and Biden, there's like a 4.5 point spread. That's very unusual. The other runoff that we had here, or special election Senate seat, there were 2 Republicans in there, so they were split. They split the vote. Warnock, I think, got 37%, and the 2 combined Republicans got about 46% or 45%. So we'll have 2 special runoffs here now for, I guess, full control of the Senate. But the things don't add up. As this Brian O'Neill points out over here, Republicans held the Senate. Republicans gained over a dozen seats in the House. Looks like it may be more. They flipped at least 2 state legislatures. I think it's going to be 3 now. They gained governors. And Trump had 17% of the black vote, and it's been said that a Republican, and it would take, if they got 10%, would win in a landslide. What this doesn't account for is that obviously he still won the white vote, but not by as much as he won it in 2016. And independents seem to have broken, based on the exit polls, very heavily towards Biden. But Trump gained in every minority group. So their indication is this election should not be close. This is a true red wave. Something is seriously fishy here, which I agree with. I mean, again, if you just go pick California, for example, look at California, the districts that are still going to be held by Democrats, but then look at how much more the Republican got in the ones that were contested, and how much the Republican got. And then look at the seats where the Republicans are going to win and their percentage of the vote now. Go pick any county really across the country, and you can see that the conservative, the Republican, outperformed what their total was in either 2018 or 2016, especially given a presidential election year when more people come out. You normally see down ballots also picking up about the same percentage roughly as the presidency in those districts. Now, again, the state may go 50 to 49, but you'll have these districts go 62-40 or 62-35 or 38 or whatever. So anyway, but if you just go across, do your own research and look, it just doesn't make sense. Josh Kraushaar here, I guess, at Hotline Josh on Twitter, said that Trump's numbers with the LGBTQ community were a stunner also, jumping from 14 to 28%. And then Tabibi talks about who's the real working class party now, and his determination is that it's Republicans are the working class party, and that Democrats have now seemed to flock to the Jack Dorseys and Facebooks and Twitters and everybody else that are very the very, very wealthy. And then Tariq Nasheed, now he's got a lot of stuff on his Twitter feed. It's all very good. Some of the stuff I disagree with, some I agree with. Here I agree with him. He said in battleground states, Biden's base is not suburban voters. So reports are saying that these magical mail-in votes are coming from these black populated urban centers. But he says, here's the thing. Black Americans don't rock with Biden like that. So what base group are these votes coming from? There's a Twitter or a video going around with Elisha, I forget his name, Elisha something on Twitter. He's got a huge following. I think he works with Breitbart or Blaze or one of those. He was punched in the face in D.C. But anyway, he was just interviewing a black trans person, and she was even saying the whole black community knows this is a rigged job. She was even saying we don't like Biden. So how did all these urban centers all of a sudden come out so heavily for Biden? She's not buying it either. So again, this goes across the board. And then even Nancy Pelosi, this is going back to 2017, says, our election was hijacked. There is no question. Congress has a duty to protect our democracy and follow the facts. This was in May of 2017. Now, if Nancy Pelosi's saying that then, but she's not saying that now, take into account, again, they all believe that Russia hijacked the election of 2016, but somehow now that there's no capability for the United States to rig their own election. So again, the double standard and hypocrisy is astounding. What's the most interesting here is the USA Today did, and I've reported on this called the Transition Integrity Project, but the USA Today covered this back in August. It was a study that was done in June, or formulated and finalized in June, that walks through different scenarios of a Republican win or a Trump win versus a Biden win and what would ensue after. I highly encourage everyone to go and find this and read it for themselves. The Republicans that were part of it were all the Never Trumpers, so the David Frooms, the Bill Kristols, the Steve Schmitz, all these guys. But on the Clinton side, it was the Podestas and just a bunch of other outspoken Democrats. But it was funded by Soros. Go and check this out. Again, very interesting, and it kind of goes into a lot of what we're going through right now. So I would highly recommend going and checking that out if you can to educate yourself on that. So again, covering all of this on the why didn't the Democrats fix the other elections? When you're in the middle of the night and you have so much time to get the guy that you really need in, because the Senate's not going to carry the Great Reset. And this all goes back to the Great Reset that you saw in Time Magazine, just came out the weekend before the election, and their entire publication was on the Great Reset. Again, just like the Transition Integrity Project, go and get it. The Great Reset is a major move economical or economy-wise across the world. It is meant to destroy America, destroy our capitalist system, and to create a new world order. And it is scary, but a lot of the things sound fantastic. Retiring school debt, free education, universal health care, everything that the left loves, right? So now they're going to be able to hold it over your head and say, I can't believe you don't want this. But it's their way to destroy America, and it's their intent. I think the guy's name is Klaus Schmidt or something, or Klaus. He's the guy at the World Economic Forum who put it all together and helped organize it. And it's scary. It is scary, scary stuff. They needed Biden, the Trojan horse, to be in the White House to make that happen. So that's their plan right now. And that's why they're fighting so hard. You're seeing the media is not really covering all this dirty politics. You're having the media come out and say there's no election fraud that goes on. At first there was none. Then it was, well, it's not widespread. Now it's gotten to where, well, it's not systemic, right? So they keep moving the goalposts. So again, I would encourage you to check all that stuff out as well. But again, let's look at the theories here, and we can wrap up that the left holds here. So if you're going to be looking at the theories where the election early polls were that Biden was winning a landslide, then that should hold up with everything else. You don't see that. So if they won at the ballot or at the early voting, then why were Republicans either leading or were within a very close margin of that based on GOP and Democrat registrations? The GOP registrations were probably going to weight to the exact same, when I say weight being the heaviness, towards what the final exit polls were. Republicans were 93% voted for Trump, according to the exit polls. In some states you have 90 or 91, but otherwise it's real averages at 93. So if you assume that those early votes then were going to be the same, then 93% of those GOP votes that came in were for Trump. I think Biden got 91% or 92% of the Democrat vote. So again, Republicans seem to be leading. So Republicans are going to lead in the early voting as well. Again, where this comes down is the independents. The independents, which tend to be white, started making up a larger percentage of the electorate. And if it's true that it looks like they went for anywhere from 10, I've seen some exit polls at 10 points to 14 points in Biden's favor, then that can swing the election, obviously. But that would indicate a landslide. That would indicate that even the Pennsylvanias aren't close by any stretch of the imagination. Georgia isn't close. Florida basically wouldn't be close. I mean, Biden would win this thing with 400 electoral votes, and that didn't pan out. So it tells you that the exit polls are wrong. But again, so their theory that, well, the early votes were Democrat, election day votes were Republican, so therefore the exit polls would weight to Republicans and scale and show that they were overwhelmingly coming out on the exit polls, and that's not what it shows. It shows the exit polls that they actually trended towards Biden. So that theory doesn't hold up. Looking across the board again, looking at state legislatures picked up, looking at House seats picked up with an increase in vote. I looked at John James, the Senate race in Michigan. I looked at his polling or his exit poll results by county, and the precincts and by county, versus what he got in 2016 when he ran against Stabenow. I think with the exception of one county, he increased his vote share across the board. And Peters won. I mean, even people in Michigan were like, I don't even really know who Peters is, right? People outside of Michigan had no clue who Peters was. And so James had name recognition and yet still lost. And he picked up a larger share of Wayne County than he got in 2016, meaning the black vote was moving to John James as well. So that's a Senate race. I think he's contesting that, which could probably bear some fruit that'll show that he actually probably ended up winning that race. And when it's all said and done, Trump may actually end up getting Michigan as well. So again, Biden underperformed everywhere with the exception of 4 cities, being Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta, and Milwaukee. And so again, once you look at that trend that Shiva and his 2 data scientists did, you see the break and you see that there's an algorithm that was clearly written. You can't make any other determination because it happened in 3 counties, all within close. Well, Kent's over at I think Grand Rapids, but 2 counties around Detroit that just had this really odd similarity across it, and then with the Kent one as well. So in Nevada, Trump carried 41% of the Hispanic vote, but lost, and he only carried 32% in 2016. So he gains 9 points amongst Hispanics. I think he lost the black vote there, or from what he got in 2016 by 3 points, I believe. But again, he barely lost white women and white men. And I'm sorry, he increased his vote amongst black men and women, but somehow lost. So again, that doesn't make any sense either. You're now seeing in Nevada, they just threw out a local race where they're pitching out 132,000, I think it is, total ballots. Overturned that race and just said, hey, we're going to have another election. But oddly, they're saying that those thrown out ballots won't impact the presidential race, which makes no sense. So again, let's not forget that Nate Silver at 538, he showed that those entries on the Philadelphia were 100% for Biden and won, I think 80-something% for the other, which is statistically impossible or statistically improbable for the 100% of the vote to go. And the same held true in Wisconsin, I think, where votes went entirely for Biden at a smaller scale, but went entirely for Biden. And then at the end of the night, Biden had to win 79% of Wisconsin and ended up winning, I think 84% is what it came back at. So in Pennsylvania, again, we were told there were 450,000 outstanding ballots at the end of the day on Thursday, 2 weeks ago. Then all of a sudden the next morning it was, oh, sorry, our bad, it's 750,000. And those broke 80% to Biden in a state that's going to be neck and neck. Again, just doesn't make sense. So statistically improbable if you take all these into account. So again, to refresh, and we'll close with a final point. So pre-election polls, we know, were horribly wrong. The mail-in ballots and the early in-person election vote, early vote, was either GOP leading or slight marginal lead for Biden, despite the Democrats saying that most Biden voters were all going to vote early. The Trump supporters flooded the voting booths on Election Day, as anyone in major cities will tell you. And it's why the Trump supporters, or why Trump overcame that 114,000 deficit of registrations in Florida. Same with Ohio and Texas. GOP led so much in Texas, and based upon, again, what Steve Deace was talking about with using Target Smart, that Trump had easily won Texas, Ohio, and Florida rather easily. And again, unfortunately, the AP and Fox didn't call those states when they should have. On election night, Trump was running away with the race. The betting markets, this is another thing, the betting markets in Vegas had a Biden 2-1 advantage going into election night before the polls closed. When polls closed and the early tabs started coming in, you started seeing that flip from 2-1 Biden to 2-1 Trump, 3-1 Trump, 4-1 Trump. It got up to 8-1 Trump at around 10, almost at the close of the West Coast. So about 11 o'clock Eastern time. When Fox News called Arizona, that switched. You could tell, and the betting markets knew something was up, right? Someone waited for it to get to 8-1, and then you saw all this money come in and sell it short. So betting markets, it's something. Vegas needed to make their money back, being that they've been taking such a hit this year. So let that sink in for a second as well, because that makes no sense as well. An 8-1 odd that happened within 2 hours of each other, 2.5 hours roughly, that all of a sudden flipped and it was back down to almost even money by, I think it was midnight. They gave Trump a 14% chance of winning at the close. He got to an 80% chance of winning at 10:30. The yuan, which is the Chinese currency, it crashed as well, plummeted around 10:15, 10:30 at night. Amazingly, it bounced when the betting odds did as well. So again, it just happened to be that's when the swing, when everybody shut down the counting because everybody knew something was rotten in Denmark. The exit poll showed a huge Biden win, swinging the independents wildly for Biden, which is true. But that isn't the case in North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Texas, Iowa, Indiana, Tennessee, or Arizona. You just didn't see a huge break like that of independents. You only see it in these states that the Democrats absolutely had to have. Why would the independents break so wildly, especially in the Rust Belt states, when their livelihoods, right, are called into question? Energy, manufacturing, so forth and so on, and yet they're going to vote themselves out of office or out of jobs. It doesn't make any sense. Why not rig the elections for Democrats? The GOP red wave definitely turned out. Again, mentioned how many seats they're going to flip. You can go on CNN and look at the House elections. They're going to pick up total control of 3 more state houses, so they're going to control 62 of 99 total houses, and control of 24 states. And like I said, in New Hampshire, they picked up 57 House seats. So this is impossible if Biden truly got Trump supporters to vote for him and move away from the Republicans and for Joe Biden. And we see that he increased his share of GOP vote by 5 points over 2016. So all of this makes zero sense. If one thinks rationally, Trump won the election. The GOP won the election. The early polls were wrong, but were done to fix races and suppress the vote, as we talked about earlier. And B, was to suggest that if Trump did win, then they had a reason to say, hey, he cheated. Right? All these polls can't be wrong. Well, we now know that they clearly were, but what they were doing was to show that if Trump did win, they could say there's no way that these guys can all be wrong, from CNN to Nate Silver to Quinnipiac. So something has to stink. And you could see the Democrats, I mean, they were protesting using this voting and Dominion software back in 2017, 18, even last year. Just a week before the election here in Georgia, PBS ran a special investigating the Dominion or the voting machines and Dominion software as well. I think that guy that they use as the data scientist or the programmer was on Newsmax last night saying how easy it was to manipulate this data or these systems. So the day of voting was massive, and that was a red wave. So the red mirage they talked about was happening as a true red wave, but then it became a red mirage when they all of a sudden flooded in these late night ballots. And so you now are expecting, especially in the Rust Belt and the Arizona, Nevada for them to shut it down. What was going on there? Why would they shut down along with the East Coast? It just made no sense. So what that did is they gave backdoor access to the Dominion engineers to slide in and manipulate the microchips. Again, there's videos you can see where a guy takes out a microchip. He says, all I need is 7 minutes. Give me 7 minutes to go into a voting machine. I can take the back of it out, pop this microchip in, and change the vote as I see fit. The more ballots were brought in that pushed that total vote turnout well above anything that in history we had seen. And in Australia, they are forced to vote, or they get fined or get punished, and they have a 92% turnout, and you're required to vote. We've never seen that here. In Wisconsin and Michigan, you saw some 89, 90. I think one county was even 94% of the total vote count, which is ridiculous. So anyway, so you have that. They were using COVID as the reason to get all the mail-in ballots out. They turned the machines back on, and then miraculously, all these huge tallies end up coming in for Biden. Then if you take that to look at the exit polls that suggest that the following cannot be true, that Democrats mostly all vote by mail, but we're down, or at least strategically or statistically even with the GOP going into Election Day. You had in-person voting that saw a swell of Democrat voters in the Rust Belt, as the media was had suggested that despite multiple eyewitnesses and the reports coming in from them to the contrary, that the lines weren't long at all in these inner cities. Call-in radio shows were saying, hey, call in if you just voted, and tell us what it's like. And people in Philadelphia were saying, hey, I just voted. It took me like 4 minutes. There was no line. This was early in the morning, like around 10:30, 11 o'clock. And then other people were calling in later in the day saying the same thing. So you just didn't see these huge turnouts. So again, it had to be these stuffed ballots coming in late at night. And these are stronghold precincts for Democrats that you would think all the people, if they were such a rush to get out and vote because they hated Trump, then they would get out and vote, and they didn't. And then again, the exit polls just show a massive Biden landslide. Once you get into the granular data, though, it leaves its conclusion on its head, because you can look at county by county results and see what was going on. So ask your own questions. Did I just witness a Venezuelan type coup to overthrow a president and defy the will of the people? So the Dominion software system, which is based in Toronto, you're using Maduro's election. What we should be using here, and should we call that into question and bring Dominion in and say, hey, what was going on? Show us your information. Multiple states had lawsuits that called into question its security. Our PBS here in Georgia did an investigation a week before. And then lastly, why has Dominion used in all the states? The largest vote count and disparity came in for Biden over Trump. Atlanta, Milwaukee, Detroit, and suburbs of Philadelphia. At some point as a country, we have to be truthful with ourselves and sit down and ask these questions and let common sense lead us to the conclusion. I don't believe in coincidences, especially when every single, what seems to be impossibility, all occurred against one candidate and for another one. So that to me just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So thank you for listening. Hopefully I was able to provide enough data that I use to justify my belief and feelings about why I think Trump won. Now, I have no idea where these court cases are going to go, where the federal lawsuits are going to go, where these affidavits from either poll watchers or other people doing the vote counting and canvassers, what they may indicate in their trials or in their court cases, if they get heard or not. But I do know something just doesn't add up. Nothing about this makes any sense. You don't shut down the vote count in basically the dead of night and then send everybody home and then just randomly start getting boxes of stuff coming in. So again, I think it's imperative for us to just really ask these questions, and regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, believe in a fair fight in a boxing match. If you're going for the guy in the red trunks versus the guy in the blue trunks, as long as the referee, right, is making sure that everybody's hitting above the belt, nobody's headbutting, right. We all want to see a fair fight in the strike zone, right, with an umpire in baseball. We want to see that if your guys get in the corner, my guys get in the corner. Why, if you're not calling balls and strikes the same way, we start to realize that it seems like they seek a certain outcome. We all as Americans want a fair fight. That's what we ask for. Let's count every legal vote. Let's make sure the signatures match. I don't understand why, if you look at the states that have some type of voter ID, you didn't really seem to have this many complications and problems. If Democrats, or if the election can be rigged towards Biden, then who's to say the next one says, this guy's a whack job. We're going to set up the system so that it goes the other way. We need to make sure that we have free and fair elections. Again, if you look at my Hammer and Scorecard video, General McInerney seems to think that that's out of the question if Biden does win, and these rigged elections are going to just be standard commonplace. We're going to be a third world country, like my friend in Costa Rica said. It looks like you guys are a third world country run by warlords, and he's correct now. I mean, my response to him was, but in our country they wear ties, right? So we just need to get to the same place, find common ground here, and I think we can all agree if vote was legally cast, that counts, right? I mean, we can debate whether or not maybe the signature doesn't match, but overall, if it's a legally cast vote, we count that. Illegally cast votes, we don't count. Boxes that show up in the middle of the night, you throw those out. You can defy the Supreme Court, and most likely all of it gets thrown out. Let's just come to an agreement that we want to make sure that we have free and fair elections as Americans in 2022, once we get past this one, regardless of the outcome, with that in mind. So thank you, and I appreciate you watching and listening. If you have any comments or thoughts, please leave them in the comments section below. I will do my best to answer them over the course of the next few days. And thank you for helping our channel grow. So please, again, if you like the content, share and like our page. And just want to say, God bless and have a blessed rest of your day. And wherever you might be in the world, I know we've got some watchers overseas as well. Thank you for watching, and God bless America. Thank you.
0, all engine running.